beauty is actually an invitation to walk in goodness, to walk in truth, and to see beauty in that way. I definitely see God in that, not just as the creator, which is wonderful, but as a beckoner.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Today, I'm talking with Aimee Byrd, an author who often pushes us to question norms we usually take for granted. If you've ever felt the pressure to put on a mask or hide parts of who you really are, you'll find this conversation meaningful. In her latest book, Saving Face, Aimee dives into the masks we all wear, the ways we conceal ourselves, and what it takes to discover our authentic selves underneath it all. We'll unpack some thoughtful questions. What stories do our faces reveal? What changes when we drop the act and allow ourselves to be seen? Aimee shares honestly from her experiences with spiritual abuse, through theological reflection, and her personal journey toward healing and authenticity. We also discuss journaling, encountering Jesus in surprising moments, and why truly seeing each other might hold answers for a deeply divided society. If you're navigating issues of faith, identity, or just interested in genuine connection, I think you'll find this episode insightful and practical. So let's get into it. This is about what it means to save face by choosing to show our real faces. Here is my conversation with Aimee Byrd. Aimee, welcome back to Shifting Culture. So glad to have you back on. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, it's great to talk again, Joshua. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's talk about faces today.
Okay.
we're going to dive into your book, Saving Face. So, why faces? What drew you to the face? What drew you to this topic? Why do you think that our faces are so important?
That's a good question. I believe that it's a theme that's kind of been working its way in my life and in my thought life. It's a very existential kind of theme, but your faces are so confrontational. And I think they're such a good metaphor too for you build like the first half of your life, you really build this kind of persona, right? This ego of the person that you want to be and you want other people to see you as. And what you define as goodness, even, and what you believe scripture teaches about that. So we try to be that. And then often it's later in life when we realize that, oh, like I've been putting all this on. I've been in this hustle. I've been striving so much, but maybe a lot of what I've constructed isn't real and isn't really me. There is a philosopher, Emmanuel Levinas, who has written about the face and the naked face and the blessings that we give in our face. And I was fascinated by his writing, but it's very academic. And so I wanted to bring that down into a more contemplative writing style. And so this book of mine is a different writing style, but it's really about encounter with yourself, encounter with other people, and encounter with God.
Well, then take us into an encounter. What are some of our first encounters of faces, and
Right.
how does that help us as we first enter this world?
Right. I mean, we come into this world looking for a face. We come looking for a face that is delighting in our face. And that really tells us something when we see that delight, when we make that connection. It tells us that we matter. It tells us that we're loved. And so we learn about who we are by the faces that we encounter. We can't see our own face. So we're learning about who we are through the faces of others. And, it's interesting because before we develop language and everything, we're really good at using that right brain that can read a face and really know what's going on in that face and what they're communicating to us. And, ultimately, we're looking for God's face. Our great longing is for us to be face to face, the vision of God, and for him to delight in us. And so I believe that our faces are, in a sense, like mirrors, showing ourselves to one another, but also like God is hiding in the face of the neighbor. And so Emmanuel Levinas does say, he says, theology begins in the face of a neighbor. And it really brings home what Christ said about, I never knew you, kind of thing. I was thirsty and you didn't give me water. I was in prison and you didn't visit me. I was naked and you didn't clothe me. And so I just think of, I'm trying to live my life now more picturing like Christ in that person I'm talking to and encountering.
That makes all the difference. If you see Christ in that person, even if they're not emulating Christ, if you
Mhm.
could see Christ in that person, we are all made in the image of God. Since we come into the world seeking a face and we know who we are for like the delight in others' faces, it seems to me that we forget that right away
Mhm.
when we're growing up. And then we're constantly striving to get back to the place of
Oh,
seeing
yeah.
the delight of other people's faces when they see me. So we could be truly known, we have our identity, and we have belonging. Where does this brokenness come into? Where does this face where we forget about the delight in others and we forget that God is delighting in us? How did we become broken?
Yeah. Well, a lot of answers to that question, right? There's the obvious Christian theological answer about sin, which is very true and real. But I try to frame it in the book too, just about like the fractures in our faces. And I feel like so I have a whole part in the book on that. And what I try to do is like with each chapter, they're shorter chapters, I have a little kind of storied memory of my own. And it's like going back and visiting my face at different stages of my life. And so I capture some of those fractures, and some of those were when I was harmed, and other times it's when I'm harming other people too, you know, in these memories, and what can we learn in them. And so I think to go back and revisit memories that have stuck with us for some reason, and why? Why is that what I remember about when I was 8? What was it that was significant there, that it's made it, like, implicit in my mind still. So I think there's a lot of fractures going on in our psyche and our souls. However, we try so hard to hide them and stuff them down. They might be parts about us that we don't like, sinful parts that we're like, "Okay, this isn't good. I can't be this person. I wanna be this person." But instead of actually being curious about why it's there, and what, we can explore and do about it, and honest with ourselves and other people, we stuff it down and pretend like we're past it, we're over it. And those things kind of pop back up later in life, or we project it onto other people. What I'm trying to do in the book here is be able to, what I kind of describe as dig up our secrets too. These encounters with Jesus in scripture, isn't he doing that over and over again? He is this kind of mirror, and he helps people dig up their secrets about themselves that's been there all along, but we just won't look at it, you know? That's the naked face.
I'm working on a one man show at the moment, and it's all about the encounters with Jesus and how when we encounter Jesus, he encounters us. It can shift everything in culture. That there's cycles of revenge will actually be stopped because there's love and forgiveness, and it's the encounter of Jesus, and it's really important. But you said something before that's really really key, is that when we actually get hurt or we hurt others and we stuff it down, then we have a face that we put on. We have a put on face, right? We don't project who we truly are to the world. What happened to you when you started to stuff down the fractures in your life? Hey friends, it's Joshua here, and I just want to take a quick moment to tell you about Shifting Culture Productions. If you've got a podcast, you're thinking about starting one, or you're dreaming up another creative venture, we're here to help bring your vision to life. From production and coaching to strategy and supports, we'll work alongside you to get your project off the ground and thriving. Let's partner together to create something impactful. To schedule a call and learn more about pricing, just email me at jjohnson@allnations.us. I'd love to hear about your ideas and see how we can make them happen. Let's create something amazing together. Reach out today.
I think I became pretty self-righteous, like, I started to believe my own story about myself, and it's interesting because, it really took I'm ashamed to say it took for me to go through terrible spiritual abuse in the church, and, I've written about that, I've spoken about that, and I've, come to see, like, as evil as it was and as cruel as it was and how it completely led to, like, disillusionment and rocking my world in a lot of ways. There was a point where I had to really do some work on myself. Like, what attracted me to a church like this in the first place? Why wasn't I looking at some things that were obviously there and wrong, until this happened to me? Why did I hold on for so long thinking there would be reform and change and, all these things? And so it was this evaluation of my own self then, like, I need better self-awareness, and so I've realized that I was attracted to this denomination particularly because it made me feel very secure. It made me feel like there was this certainty, there was kind of an elitism in that theology, that system that they had, and it made me feel safe and secure and right, and good. And then when I saw it all blow up and was led to such disillusionment, I was seeing some of that in my own self and my own character as well. And one memory I've revisited in the book is of one of my oldest, dearest childhood friends whom I harmed a couple times. But one time, in my 30s when she was going our 30s when she was going through a divorce, and I looked back and saw just how clueless I was to her pain, how self-righteous I was, about this divorce. We both came from divorce homes. So, I didn't believe that she would do that. Like I was putting it on her though. And it really fractured our friendship. And I will say, like, being able to go through that memory work and share it with her, like we've been able to grow some more together, but it's because I was able to look at my own self and be like, what's the matter with me? How did I do that to my friend, and truly torn up and broken over it. So, yeah, I mean, this is not easy work to do, but it's very freeing because then you realize, like, all the work that you're doing to keep that hustle going of this, false person that you thought you were.
One thing that you said in there I think is really key. I could see if you get disillusioned, you experience spiritual abuse, you see the system that is not right, and then you just go against the system, get out of it, and you don't do your own work and have any self-awareness of who you are in the midst of it, you could start to perpetrate the same toxic
Absolutely.
things that are happening within the church. And so, like, doing that work is really crucial and key if we want to see any healing within the church and with each other as a community. What led you to some of this work? How did you start to say, I actually have to start to excavate what's inside of me and
Right.
not just put everything on other people, which they perpetrated horrible things, but it's, I have a part to play in this too, and I need to figure out who I am.
Yeah, I think multiple things led me to that. My time in the Word, definitely. I've spent significant time in the Song of Songs, and I feel like that intimate book in the Bible, that is kind of this intimate encounter with God. That I think was able to help me to feel like loved enough by God to be able to do that, how and develop my own longings and desires. However, our family has really struggled in finding a good church home ever since. Like, we're still working at it. A lot of it's our own, not ready to be that vulnerable. Other parts of it are like, what the heck's going on with the church right now? You know? And in some ways, you feel a little stranded and alone. And yet I think God has me in that liminal space. Maybe I wouldn't do that work if I was able to rush right back into another community. And so I think that's another area. I've been doing a lot of journaling. I think that's you really can get to some self-awareness when you do a practice like that. And then, I've also had more interest in psychology because I felt like one surprising thing to me was how immature the leaders in the church were when I went through this problem. And in a way that's embarrassing to even talk with unbelievers about because it's such a poor witness of the church to see like the level of name calling and coming after, my reputation online and, you know, taking my kids' pictures and doing stuff with them and terrible, terrible things. And the way none of it could really be addressed in the the process of church order. So odd, very disillusioning to see the level of immaturity in these leaders, spiritually, emotionally, in trying to address some of this in a mature way and not have that reciprocated. So that led me to really, look more into things like Carl Jung. He talks about the shadow. And, a lot of that is like you build this persona your whole life and then you're stuffing these other things down. That's the shadow. But there comes a time in life where we got to dig that back up and look at it and unpack it, see what it's all about and how does that get integrated into our whole self. I feel like the church has a lot of shadow work to do. Now for sure, but even, like, in looking at our history. So, these are all things I think that got me onto this topic and wanting to do that work.
Thank you for doing that work and showing us that we actually have to do some of this shadow work. How do we start? How do we move towards a place where we could start to find our identity not in the scars that we have, the things that we've actually been fractured by, the striving that we do, the masks that we put on, but actually then take them off with each other? What is something like incarnational listening or like being involved with somebody like that we could open up in safe places? What does it look like to open up safe places so that we could start to do some of this work together?
Close relationships are so important, right? Relationships where you really feel like you can be open. And so, what I'm trying to do in this book is help start a conversation, but really help us develop within ourselves to be that kind of person. To be the kind of person who is a safe person to talk to, who isn't going to shame you right away, but is gonna help us to dig out our own secrets and, not secrets like, I did this terrible crime or whatever, but just things that we haven't faced about ourselves. And to encourage that encounter with where God is meeting us in that. So I think that friendship is so important. And, that's something I have written a lot about in my books and in my blogging and substacking. And it's something I was also disillusioned with a little bit after the church experience I had because, small groups are great in church, but sometimes they can be deceiving as well. Like I thought I was in this small group that was one thing, and I found out it was another thing, but I still have some really close friendships from my small group at church as well. So some were very painful, and then some have made it through, and I believe those were the ones that functioned with more maturity and being able to be like, these are couples, married couples that we can talk to about our own struggles, and know that they're not gonna gossip about it somewhere, or they're not gonna be like, "Oh my gosh, can you believe?" And that kind of thing. But that we're truly able to help one another imagine God's goodness and vision for us, even when we can't feel it ourselves. To be able to be that for other people is such a gift. And, I mean, I'm thinking of my own self, and I'm thinking about my friends who, have been in the pit, and, whether it's a spouse leaving them, and completely heartbroken and not knowing, like, how they ever are gonna have a future without that person. And to be able to sit there with them in the pit and remind them of their goodness, but also to be like, "Yeah, this sucks," and to grieve with them, but then also be able to remind them, imagine for them the goodness that is ahead, and then to be there when it happens. You know? And when somebody's in the pit, like, your brain can't hold all that stuff together. Like Diane Langberg talks about this a lot. When somebody's experienced trauma, they repeat things over and over because it just doesn't make sense and their brain can't hold it. But not to get tired of it, to continue to be there for them through that. They'll get through it. To be that person who stays in the room.
I don't know, for some reason, this has reminded me of the movie Sing Sing, which it's a beautiful movie. Not many people have seen it. It didn't make very much money, but it's a true story about Sing Sing Prison, an arts program in Sing Sing. So they put on plays, and it's one of the best recidivism programs in the United States. More people stay out of jail when they go through this program than any other program in the U.S. But the thing that Coleman Domingo's character does in the movie is he calls people beloved. They call each other beloved.
Uh-huh.
So as they're in a group together, they're seeing each other for their true identity as beloved children of God before whatever they did, and we often put whatever we did on us. And so the belovedness is hidden underneath all of the shame and all of the hurts and all the loss that we have in our life. And so we have to recover our belovedness. And when we do that, then we could actually see belovedness in others, where you can see the
Ooh,
face of
love
Jesus
that.
in others. For you, where did you start to discover some of your belovedness? Like, what does it look like in scripture to unfold the belovedness of Aimee?
Well, again, the Song of Songs it ministered to me deeply. Going through what I went through, a huge part of it was being a woman going through that, right? And speaking in these dynamics in the church of men and women and being shamed as a woman and the words used to shame me, Jezebel, the great whore of Babylon, you don't say that about men. The Song of Songs is like the woman is the dominant voice in that book, and she represents Christ's people, his beloved, right, his church, and she opens and closes the song. She rushes in immodestly in the beginning, like, saying what she wants, and there's also parts in there, though, where she can't find God, she's looking for him, there's these night scenes, she's abused, by the keepers, the gatekeepers, the guards, and where where is he? She can't find her lover, and why isn't he there for her? But then, she finds him again. So I love that because I just think it really takes you through so much of life. Those words I take truly to be like this is Christ speaking to me, you know? And so he says, "You are beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you." And I just think, wow, like those words, I long to hear that from God. And it's because of Christ that he, will say that to us. And there's a sense of receiving that right now. In the beginning of the story, she says, "Don't look at me. I'm swarthy." Like, and she's got this shame. And at the end, she's a very different voice. It's so emotive. Which is interesting because I was in a denomination that really took that away, it was so super theological and so left brain and, analytical, and I think that one thing that attracted me to that was that I do have a more contemplative, mystical kind of personality, and so I felt like I need to hone this in, I need to be this, and this, to go back and see, "Oh, man, this is in scripture," and it's beautiful. There's a reason why metaphor is used to teach in scripture. It does more than just the prepositional statements, It does more than the dogma. It directs our desires. It develops our longings, it gives us this picture of, oh, it's beautiful. So, poetry can teach us in ways that just stating doctrine cannot. Obviously, we need both. I think that's something that really helped me to know that I'm beloved. That, and then coupled with, people in my life who the gig was up. Like, even if people were saying horrible things about me that weren't true, my reputation was publicly ruined. I had to deal with, well, how do you live then? Do you keep defending yourself? I know I had to look to myself. Okay, I know I'm not the things that these people are calling me, but how am I going to respond? Who am I? And so the conflict itself and the confrontation, the many, many confrontations I had to have, both with others and myself, I think is another way of saying, okay, even when I'm in the pit, Jesus is right there beside me.
Hey everyone, it's Joshua here. I want to take a quick moment to say thank you for being part of the Shifting Culture community. If you're enjoying the conversations we're having, it would mean the world to me if you would rate and review the podcast wherever you're listening. Your feedback not only helps others discover the show, but also keeps us inspired to bring you these impactful conversations. And if you're looking to dive even deeper, head on over to Substack at shiftingculture.substack.com, where you'll find extra insights, reflections, and more ways to engage with the topics that we explore here. Finally, if you believe in what we're doing and want to support the show, you can make a donation through the Support the Show link in the episode notes. Every contribution helps keep these important conversations alive. Thanks so much for listening and for being part of this journey to embody Jesus and impact the culture around us. It reminds me, well, it doesn't remind me, but it tells me that if people are going through what you went through, if I'm your friend, I'm important to you. Like, I need to speak life and truth into you during
Yeah.
that time. A lot of times, I don't know, a lot of times everybody else ignores it. We have to be very intentional with the people
Right.
in our lives to move towards them, to see them for who they are, and then to help them see who they are. And not believe all the lies that are being thrown at them, because I
Even
think that happens a lot.
right. And I think another thing that happens a lot is you look at people who are like who we'd call strong, who can handle conflict well, who, seem to hold themselves together well, who lead well. And you think, okay, well, they're okay. And I think a lot of times you don't realize like what that kind of strength takes and what is going on in their inner world. And I know for me, even, see, this started in 2020, all the horribleness when my book Recovering from Biblical Manhood and Womanhood came out. It's 2025, and I am still, like, even now is when my body is telling me more about the trauma I went through. I've been holding on to it for so long. So it's just like you think for years, just trying to be like the mature one, trying to address this in the best way you know how. Not that I didn't make mistakes and sin and that and everything else, but now I feel like, wow, it's not like, oh, let me just take a year to heal here. you know, it does some real damage. And so those friendships who were there, who made me realize too, like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that they say you're the great whore of Babylon. It's horrible that they're doing that. That matters that they're church leaders. We still love you. Like that doesn't matter what's being said there.
You said something right there that your body is just keep catching up. And a lot of times, I mean, you were in a denomination that you were almost like heads on a stick. Like it's about the intellect and
Yeah.
the mind. How have you started to learn that actually trauma and all of this actually is stored in your body? Has
Mhm.
there been anything that you've done with your body that what we can do to actually move us to take off the masks, to say, oh, I am me, because I could actually heal, because
Mhm.
Jesus is an embodied God. He came in flesh. The body, I think, is really important, and he suffered. So what has the body been for you, and how has that helped you heal?
Even though I was in that kind of denomination, I've always been very much an embodied person. I grew up with my dad teaching martial arts and jujitsu in our home. My mom even because we had a dojo. My mom used it to teach aerobics to the neighbors in the evenings. Like very physical family. So that's something I've carried through my adulthood. Is a physicality is very important to me. So I thought I was doing good, Joshua. I thought, like, I'm doing this, like, I'm reading books, the body keeps the score, I'm, like, doing it all. So I felt like, I'll do some yoga here or there, I felt like I was doing well. But the thing is, I think, which is the craziest trick you can play on yourself, is like I was trying so hard to be okay and tell everybody I'm okay. But inside, my body was like, you're not okay. You have got to be able to say this to yourself and to others. And, it's hard when people, even leaders who you'd like to repair some things with, well, or friends will say things like, well, I was going to say this, but I didn't because of your trauma, you know? Like people like afraid, tiptoeing it up to like you're a bomb that could explode. But really, it's a manipulative way of not moving towards repair. And wanting you to put on this face so they can feel better about themselves. And I think I was doing that in a lot of ways, putting on this "I'm okay" face. And, you do it for your kids and all that as well, and you want to be able to just move on with your life. Yeah, my back and my shoulders are like, "No. No, it's not that easy." I think that's a blessing in a lot of ways, right? Because this stuff you can hold in and lead to heart attacks and stuff. So, my muscles are telling me, "No, actually, you are tense as can be because you've been trying to be okay this whole time, and help other people be okay." But, I think that's another thing too is I'm trying to learn, to listen to my body better, and journaling has really helped with that, is to not keep acting like you're okay when you're not.
Then let's get into some journaling because I think you've mentioned it a few times. It's been very key for you.
Uh-huh.
Take us through a journaling practice. What's a good journaling practice and why is it healing? What's helpful within journaling for us?
Oh, man. Well, I've always been, I'm a writer, so journaling comes pretty naturally for me. And I'm not one who likes to follow a program, I like to have a place that it kind of mentally gets me ready. And, 15, 30 minutes, depending on what's in your head that day. And some of it's just getting out dumb stuff that's circling around your head, But then other parts of it are like getting out things that you maybe are afraid to say out loud, you know? It's okay. Nobody's reading it. Just put it out there. Or getting out like things that you're afraid to say to God, as if he doesn't know it's in there. And I think that's where the Song of Songs has been so helpful for me too, because, here we have this woman's voice representative of ours. And I'm like, wow, you can talk that way to God? She lays it out, she talks about things. So I've been doing that more. And so it's weird. My journaling is kind of in and out with conversation with God as well, and trying to listen during that as well. So it can be very prayerful, but not in, I was just writing something about the book, and it was kind of a summation thing for my Substack that I'm going to post later. But I remember growing up being taught, like, how to pray using acts and, well, affirmation, confession, thankfulness, or whatever, as supplication. And I'm like, what bull crap? Like, so manipulative and fake. And, like, it's just like, do you talk to anyone else that way? We're not taught to pray like that in scripture. Like, it's just not personal. It's, like worksheet you're filling out or something. It's formulaic. And so, another thing that's really helped me is Saint Teresa's The Interior Castle. Is that what it's called? Her book. Really good. It's more mystical. But, the premise behind it too is that if God is within us as believers through his Holy Spirit, then in our being somehow is God's tabernacle where he delights to be in. He delights to be there. And so, her book is about helping you get to that core of communion with God, who delights to dwell in you and in your neighbor. How amazing is that? And so there's another book called Entering the Castle. I want to say the author's name's Carolyn Miss, but I might have that wrong. That book is actually about doing the work. And so she's got a lot of journaling questions in there. And they're hard. They're facing yourself kind of journaling questions. And, I remember one of them was like, name 8 times you humiliated someone else or something like that. And I'm like, oh, we never do that, and then I start writing and I'm like, "Oh my goodness, like, what have I who am I?" But, I found that kind of stuff extremely helpful, you know? It's just amazing, like, we all know that, in your friendships and your even acquaintances, you can know something about someone that they don't get about themselves pretty quickly and pretty easily, And, I mean, that's so crazy, isn't it? And to try to get in touch with that, how other people perceive you things that you're projecting that you just have no clue. And that's really where my face part gets into it too, like that we're drawn it's our honorable duty, a special privilege to help people dig their own selves out.
That's so good. I think we need to do that work. And if I thought early on that, hey, my body is a temple, right? This is what I was
Yeah.
told. I was like, okay, I can't put anything bad in my body. I got to be clean. I got to make sure that I work out, and God's gonna
Mhm.
be okay with my body. But when Teresa of Avila is talking about that, He delights in you already. That the tabernacle is inside of you, and He already delights in you. That puts me at a different starting place of I'm already delighted in, and then I could start to move and figure out
Mhm.
who I am, the one that God delights in. That's a huge different starting place than
Isn't it?
what we were taught growing up.
I know, and it's, like, almost like we're afraid to teach that, but I don't think it leads to bad behavior, or sin, it's the
It
opposite.
makes me want to do better. And,
Right,
but
and but it's also frees you to, like, not judge yourself in all that, be more curious, and to be able, I think, to truly be repentant, because you can make that turn, and it's okay to relearn and say, "Oh, got that wrong," I don't know why that's so hard.
right, it's really hard. How can we physically work on our faces? That we can start to be a face that delights in other people, that
Yes,
is the face of Christ.
yes.
I know that some people see my face and I look angry. They think I'm mad at them or something
Right?
because I have, a face that doesn't always project delight and
Mhm.
love. How can I work on my face? How can I get it better so I can be better for other people?
Yeah, well, I don't think you wanna put something on that's not there, right? But, one thing I talk about in the book is this idea of benediction, and, we have that as part of our worship service, the end of the service. You see it in Numbers where, one of the great blessings in the benediction is, "May God's face shine upon you." And what does that mean? And why do we really want that? Like, that makes my heart kind of leap a little bit to think about. And so, even as something as simple, I think, and Emmanuel Levinas talks about this, when we encounter another face, we actually can strip that face naked and get behind their countenance. But what we find is they're vulnerable, right? Like in that moment, we could liquidate that person. And everybody holds that. And we all know it, and that's why we put these defenses up, right? And so he calls the commandment of God in the face is thou shalt not kill. When we see another face, we are awakened to that commandment, and that's what he calls, like, our whole righteousness of being. Like, the book is called, "Is it righteous to be?" Like, that's a question, right? And for him, it is, yes, because my face awakens you and really to love, right? The opposite side of thou shalt not kill is to bless, to love, which is what God does, which is what we are to do. And it's the greatest commandment, right? The second one, like it, is to love your neighbor as yourself. And that's because that is loving God with all our heart and with all our mind, because He's in them. I think that something very simple is in our benediction when we meet faces with somebody else, that to really show it's good that you're alive. I'm happy to see you. To give that kind of blessing, and I even that sounds fabulous, but what does that look like for your enemies, you know? It's really being real, and so I journal I share journal entries in the book, and, I journal through that a little bit, like, what would it look like if I were to see this elder who said this about me? What if I ran into them? Like, and, even some basic recognition. And I have to do that work before I would run into them. um, Basic recognition that God is kind to this person. God is kind to this person. How can I recognize that in my face? How can I recognize that in my interaction, in my countenance, even in an exchange? Even if there are no words given. But, there's a humility that happens when I think about that, right? And I have the opportunity to liquidate that person. But maybe that's the blessing, is just recognizing, in that relationship, God is kind to that person. So I think that it's not as easy as just saying, "Bless everybody with your face," but it's real work, and it's different because 'cause we're humans, and we're unique and wonderful and complicated and complex. So I think it's great to be able to think through those things.
Help us as fighting polarized American
Oh, man.
people
Yeah.
to be better, to
Oh,
to figure out how we could see
100%.
everybody. Well, the problem, everybody's an enemy at the moment. Like,
Mhm.
everybody's an enemy, and we start out shouting. And so what's the work that we have to do to counteract that, to
Yeah.
come in a different posture, to then maybe diffuse something so we could start to see each other again?
Yeah, see each other again. I like that you said that. I mean, this is above my pay grade, but I feel each one of us really does have to do that individual work. And, I have some strong convictions politically and, within my own family, there are strongly different convictions, an extended family. So I think that's where I start first because that's the hardest. And within myself, but then also to be like, all right, here's a person that I know and love, and I don't think they're idiots, like, they have many, many great values and intelligence and all this. I can't understand how these things go together, you know? But to try to see, like, okay, where to ask good questions, you know, and to recognize what values do connect, and then to say, like, "Well, we share this value, however, this is how I see it play out, and this is how you see it play out," you know? But I think it is so hard, like, I mean, there are plenty of times where it's just, like, better to not talk about politics with some people so that I can still love them, you know? So I feel like but I can also say, I still value this person so much. There's other things I can learn from this person still too, and God is kind to them.
So this is what happens when our identity and belonging happen, and we get caught up into something that is fleeting, that could actually go away. Then when it does go away, then we have to try to figure out who we are again and
Mm,
again and again and again. And so we get scared. I think we're running on fear. And like the whole world is running on fear at the moment. And
yeah.
so because we are so fearful, how do we move towards the face of Jesus, and how does that encounter help us dispel some of that fear and
Mhm.
to receive his love so that we can be people of love?
Yeah. Well, and we have to face our fear. I think we stuff the fear down and we cover it up with all these things that we think will fix it, but we don't actually face the fear itself. What is the core of that fear? And sometimes we'll face the surface of it, but not really what's behind it. And that's where I think the journal work is really helpful too. But to be able to say, I'm terrified. Why am I why am I terrified? And and to really work that out, and let's go worst case scenario of what I'm terrified of. Who will I be then? And will God be there? Who will be there, you know? So I think that we get caught in this loop of fear and trying to get past the fear when really we need to face the fear. Ask some of those more existential questions that we can even find meaningfulness there where we are now. And we have to be in this place now. We can't get past it. So what does that mean for us?
You talked about journaling a lot, and that's one way that we could start to find the face of Jesus and that he could encounter us. Are there any other practices that could help us find his face where he could find us and we could actually realize that he is actually looking at us?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope church, I would really hope church, and, even in our liturgies, it's designed to do that, right? To show us Christ, to give us Christ and the, means of grace in his preached word and in the sacraments. That's something I really valued, from my other denomination. But now I see as well that he's not just contained in these sacraments. He's walking on the street right next to me, my neighbor and my neighbor. So I think is in that loving others that we're called to do. It's hard, you know? And so looking for Christ in that is really helpful, but it is also the blessing. So I in our relationships, in our encounters during the day, to be awakened, to see Christ at work. And then such a huge thing to help me in healing and growing is beauty. It's all around us. It's so powerful. And, some authors and philosophers talk about beauty is actually an invitation to walk in goodness, to walk in truth, and to see beauty in that way. I definitely see God in that, not just as the creator, which is wonderful, but as a beckoner, you know? And sometimes beauty is as simple as me being out on my front stoop and, seeing some animal, like, funny bird thing or squirrel or, beautiful sunset. But other times it's beauty in moving out of my comfort zone and sitting next to somebody suffering, and finding beauty happening in that, in the witness. I think witness is holiness. So to really look at, okay, it's not just the bread and the wine that's been blessed on Sunday morning that's holy, but it's this encounter with this person right now, or this encounter with nature right now. Like, God isn't just contained in those other things.
Well, thank you for encountering me in this holy space. And this is a holy encounter. And so I appreciate that. What would you have hopes for your readers that would pick up your book, Saving Face?
I would love for people to do book clubs with it because I just feel like it's a stimulator of conversation. I feel like it can be such a good tool to get people to start journaling, to get people to start thinking about their own memories, and why they're significant in their life and how, help them become the type of person they are. Or to want to be able to talk with others in a safe place about, oh, I'm starting to see too, like, this persona versus what's down deep in me, and I wanna be able to dig some of that out, you know? So I hope that it can really promote also just, reaching out of our own little bubbles of whatever denominations we're in, even how it's so connected to politics now, but to reach out of our little bubbles and to see the goodness that's around us as well, and to be able to communicate better in that way.
And people will love the cover of the book. I
Isn't
love
that
the cover.
amazing?
It's so good. It's
Yeah,
so good.
Wayne Brzezinka, we hired an artist out of Tennessee, he's amazing. It was actually three-dimensional, what he made. Yeah, he's a cool guy, man.
Yeah.
So
That's
happy.
amazing.
Uh-huh.
Uh, can people get that too? Can they get a print of that cover?
Oh, yeah, Wayne Brzezinka art maybe.com or
Mm,
just waynebrzezinka.com, and he's got some really amazing work on there to look at.
awesome. That's good. Any recommendations for us? Anything you've been reading or watching lately you could recommend for us?
Well, I mean, I've just been really digging deeper into the mystics. Like, I would love for people to read Teresa of Avila. Like, that would be really helpful, I think. But also, a book that another foundational book for writing this one was C.S. Lewis's novel, Till We Have Faces, and the encounter there at the end of the book. But the whole novel is so good. So it would be a really, I think, better than a companion to reading Saving Face. It's really what provoked me. So, yeah, there's two things.
Nice. So go get Saving Face. It's a fantastic read. I really love. I mean, as you have always, I love your writing, and love the way that you write, especially in this book. The journal entries and just
All different.
the way that you've put things in there. It just feels very. It feels like we're encountering your face in the midst of this book, which is wonderful. It helps us open up and free ourselves to know that we could be a little bit more vulnerable, that we could say, hey, we've actually put on faces that are not our own, that we
Mhm.
need to figure out how to take those off. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book that I hope a lot of people get. How
Thank you.
can people get it? And is there anywhere else you'd like to point people to?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a landing page for it, savingfacebook.com. You can go on Amazon, you can go on Barnes and Noble, but I think all the links are on there. If you do pre-order it before April 8th, you can be you get some different bonuses. But one of them that I'm excited about is you get to be a part of a book club on my Substack,
Hmm.
which is Bird in Your Box at substack.com. But I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to bring people together and get them talking like the ways that I'm hoping that people will when they read the book. So,
Nice. That's good. Well, I subscribe to your Substack, and so I think other people should do that as well. Aimee, thank you for this conversation. Thank you that we could figure out how we could actually encounter the face of Jesus so that we can figure out who we truly are, that we could become people that reflect his face, that then we could see the goodness in other people's faces, that we could know that they are made in the image of God, that there's belovedness within them as well, and the graciousness and goodness of Jesus, even when they're our enemy and it's difficult for us. And
mhm.
thank you for diving into like practices like journaling and how that has helped heal our yourself, and then it could help heal us as we walk through the places where, man, these are the places we need healing, and we could have some prayer time listening to God in that space, and we figure out, hey, how do I heal and where do I go from here? You were on a year ago, and something has shifted in you from a year ago that
Wow.
has given you there's a little more softness and love in you than before, which it was there before.
Yeah.
But I've seen, I
Yeah,
don't
thank
know,
you.
maybe you have
Thank you.
encountered the face of Jesus
You're
in
digging
deep, deep ways.
a little bit. Thank you. I appreciate you noticing and telling me that because I sure, you know, can't measure those things.
Yeah.
So quite a compliment to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for this conversation. That's great.
All right. Hopefully we'll talk again.
Yes.